Chapter 1. The Unraveling. David Miller sat at his computer, the blue glow of the screen illuminating the darkened room. It was almost 10:00 p.m., and his wife, Sarah, was once again late coming home from work. This had become a disturbing routine over the past few months. Their children, Ethan and Grace, had already eaten dinner, finished their homework, and gone to bed, not even bothering to ask about their mother anymore. The absence of Sarah's presence was becoming a normality, one that filled David with an increasing sense of sadness and loneliness. As David stared at the screen, he couldn't help but feel the weight of their financial struggles pressing down on him. The past 2 years had been financially disastrous. Their income had dwindled significantly, yet Sarah seemed oblivious, continuing to spend money as if nothing had changed. David had just finished paying the bills, and the stark reality was that they might get by for only a couple more months. Lost in his thoughts, he didn't notice Sarah standing in the doorway until she crossed her arms and spoke, her voice cold and detached. "David, I want a divorce." The words hit him like a freight train. 17 years of marriage reduced to a single emotionless sentence. David felt a mix of emotions, shock, anger, and an unexpected sense of relief. He looked at Sarah, trying to recall the happy times they had shared, but the memories seemed distant and faded. "Okay," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression didn't change. She turned and walked away, leaving David alone with his thoughts. He stared at the empty doorway for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. David was an exceptional software engineer, but his promotion to senior management at Tech Innovations, Inc. had taken him away from the work he loved. He missed coding, the creative process, and the satisfaction of solving complex problems. The managerial role had been a poor fit, filled with endless meetings and administrative tasks that left him feeling unfulfilled. It was no surprise that his performance had suffered, eventually leading to his dismissal from the company. The months following his firing were some of the darkest in David's life. Depression set in, and it was only his children's routine that kept him grounded. Breakfast, school, snack, homework, dinner, bed, it became his mantra, a way to regain some semblance of control over his life. Embracing his new role as a stay-at-home dad, he found solace in the small moments of joy shared with Ethan and Grace. Sarah, however, seemed to drift further away. She was distant, often staying late at her job at a marketing startup. Their conversations became superficial, and the once lively household grew quiet and tense. David met Sarah during his college years at a fraternity party he had almost skipped. Unlike the typical party-goers, David was shy and introverted, more interested in his studies than socializing. Sarah, too, was reserved but beautiful in her simplicity. Their initial meeting was brief, but it led to coffee dates and study sessions that gradually blossomed into a deeper relationship. They married shortly after graduation and settled into a modest apartment in San Francisco, both working hard to make ends meet. Their early years were filled with love and happiness. They supported each other as careers, expanded their social circle, and saved for their future. When Ethan was born, followed by Grace a couple of years later, they moved to a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, complete with a dog and 2 cars. Life was perfectly average, yet David couldn't have been happier. David's promotion to senior management at Tech Innovations, Inc. marked a significant turning point. The new salary and benefits improved their lifestyle, but it also marked the beginning of the end for their marriage. Sarah decided to return to work part-time, finding a job that aligned with the children's school schedule. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but the cracks were starting to show. David's first hint of Sarah's infidelity came 3 months before their 15th anniversary. He found a pink box with a white ribbon hidden in her closet. Inside was lingerie and a note addressed to Beloved, promising a special gift on his birthday. The discovery filled him with suspicion, but he decided to watch and wait. On his birthday, David made an extra effort to show Sarah his love, showering her with flowers, foot massages, and her favorite dinner. Her reaction was indifferent, almost as if she was merely tolerating his gestures. That night, instead of the promised gift, Sarah handed him a small, cheaply wrapped box from the nightstand and then went to sleep. The disappointment was crushing. The next day, David's depression deepened. He replayed the events over and over, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His suspicions were confirmed when Sarah called to say she'd be late for a colleague's birthday celebration. The name Brian Mitchell, her boss, sent a wave of nausea through him. The reality of Sarah's betrayal was undeniable. Determined to find the truth, David hired a private investigator. The reports that followed were a painful confirmation of his worst fears. Sarah was not only involved with Brian, but also with several other men from her office. The betrayal was deeper and more widespread than he had imagined. David decided he needed to take control of his life. He couldn't let Sarah's actions define his future. He spent the next few weeks planning his revenge, a meticulous strategy to ensure that Sarah would face the consequences of her actions. He enrolled in an executive MBA program, purchased a new luxury SUV, and set up educational savings accounts for Ethan and Grace, depleting their joint savings in the process. But David's plans went beyond financial maneuvers. He hired a private surveillance team to gather irrefutable evidence of Sarah's affairs. He wanted to make sure that when the time came, he would have everything he needed to expose her and protect his children. The final piece of his plan fell into place when Sarah announced she had a work conference on their anniversary. It was the ultimate insult, and David knew he had to act. He filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity, seeking full custody of the children and the house. He also filed lawsuits against Brian and the other men involved, knowing that even if he didn't win, the notoriety would damage their reputations. The stage was set for a showdown that would change their lives forever. David was no longer the passive, heartbroken husband. He was a man with a plan, determined to reclaim his life and protect his children from the fallout of Sarah's betrayal. Chapter 2. Evidence and Confirmation. David Miller sat in his home office, the surveillance footage playing on his laptop screen. He had spent the past few weeks piecing together the evidence of Sarah's infidelity, each revelation a fresh wound. The private investigator had done an impeccable job, providing David with detailed reports, photos, and videos of Sarah's indiscretions. She had been involved with multiple men from her office, with Brian Mitchell being the primary lover. David's hands trembled as he watched the grainy video of Sarah and Brian entering a hotel room. He paused the footage and closed his eyes, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The evidence was undeniable. His wife of 17 years had been leading a double life, and now he had the proof. The next morning, David decided it was time to confront Sarah with what he knew. He waited until Ethan and Grace had left for school, the house eerily quiet without the usual morning bustle. Sarah was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as David entered, her expression neutral. "We need to talk," David said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Sarah raised an eyebrow, setting her phone down. "About what?" David placed the manila envelope on the table and slid it towards her. "Open it." Sarah hesitated, her eyes flickering with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She opened the envelope and pulled out the photos, her face blanching as she realized what they were. "David, I can explain." "Explain what?" David interrupted, his voice rising. "Explain how you've been lying to me and our children, how you've been sneaking around with your boss and God knows who else." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but David felt no sympathy. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "It's just not what it looks like." David laughed bitterly. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like. I have all the evidence I need, Sarah. I've had you followed, recorded, documented. There's no denying it." Sarah's tears turned to anger. "You had me followed? You spied on me?" David leaned in, his eyes cold. "What did you expect me to do, Sarah? Sit around and pretend everything was fine while you made a fool out of me? While you betrayed our family?" Sarah looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm sorry, David. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," David said quietly. "And now we have to deal with the consequences." For the next few days, the tension in the house was palpable. Sarah avoided David, spending most of her time at work or locked in their bedroom. David focused on his plan, meticulously organizing the evidence and consulting with his lawyer. He knew that the legal battle ahead would be brutal, but he was determined to fight for his children and his dignity. One evening, as David was reviewing the surveillance reports, Ethan walked into his office. "Dad, can we talk?" David looked up, surprised. Ethan rarely initiated serious conversations. "Sure, buddy. What is on your mind?" Ethan closed the door behind him and sat down. "I know something's going on between you and Mom. She's been acting weird, and you've been really stressed. Are you guys getting a divorce?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had hoped to shield Ethan and Grace from the worst of it, but it seemed they had already picked up on the tension. "Yes, Ethan. Your mom and I are getting a divorce." Ethan's eyes widened, and he looked down at his hands. "Why? What happened?" David struggled to find the right words. "Sometimes people change. They make choices that hurt the people they love. Your mom and I have grown apart, and there are things she's done that have made it impossible for us to stay together." Ethan nodded slowly, processing the information. "What about me and Grace? What's going to happen to us?" David reached out and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You and Grace are the most important things in my life. No matter what happens between your mom and me, we will always love you and be there for you. I'll make sure you both are taken care of." Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with worry. "Are we going to have to move?" David shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you and Grace have a stable home. We'll get through this together." Ethan nodded, his expression resolute. "Okay, Dad. I trust you." As Ethan left the room, David felt a renewed sense of determination. He had to stay strong for his children, no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. The next day, David met with his lawyer, Rebecca Hayes, to finalize the details of the divorce proceedings. Rebecca was a seasoned attorney, known for her tenacity and expertise in family law. She reviewed the evidence David had collected, nodding approvingly. "This is solid," she said, looking up from the documents. "We have a strong case for infidelity, which will work in your favor for custody and asset division." David nodded. "I want full custody of Ethan and Grace. I can trust Sarah to put their needs first." Rebecca sighed. "Full custody is a tough battle, but with the evidence of her affairs, we have a good chance. We'll also aim to get you the house and as much financial support as possible." David felt a surge of gratitude towards Rebecca. "Thank you. I just want to make sure my kids are okay." Rebecca smiled. "We'll do our best, David. Stay strong, and we'll get through this." As the days turned into weeks, the legal battle intensified. Sarah hired her own lawyer, who fought back fiercely, trying to paint David as controlling and overbearing. But the evidence of her infidelity was overwhelming, and each court appearance seemed to tilt the scales further in David's favor. In the midst of the chaos, David found solace in his children. He made sure to spend quality time with them, attending their school events, helping with homework, and simply being present. Ethan and Grace were his anchor, keeping him grounded and focused on what truly mattered. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Grace looked up at David with wide eyes. "Daddy, are you going to be okay?" David smiled, ruffling her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. We are all going to be okay. We have each other, and that is what matters most." As he looked around the table at his children, David felt a sense of hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but with Ethan and Grace by his side, he knew they could face anything together. Chapter 3. Planning Revenge. David Miller sat in his home office, the dim light of his desk lamp casting shadows on the walls. His laptop screen displayed a spreadsheet detailing his finances, his plans meticulously laid out. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions and revelations, but now it was time to act. He had to ensure that Sarah would face the consequences of her actions and that he would protect his children from the fallout. The first step in his plan was to deplete their joint savings. He had already started by enrolling in an executive MBA program at a prestigious local university. The cost was substantial, but it was an investment in his future. He knew he needed to rebuild his career and his confidence, and this program would provide him with the skills and credentials to do just that. David also decided to purchase a new luxury SUV. It was an extravagant expense, but one that served multiple purposes. It not only depleted their savings, but it also provided him with a reliable vehicle for the years ahead. He made sure to pay in cash, leaving no traceable debt. Next, David fully funded Ethan and Grace's educational savings accounts. He wanted to ensure their future was secure no matter what happened. The accounts were set up in a way that Sarah couldn't touch them, providing him with peace of mind. But David's plans went beyond financial maneuvers. He had hired a private surveillance team to gather irrefutable evidence of Sarah's affairs. The reports they provided were comprehensive, detailing her encounters with Brian Mitchell and several other men from her office. The photos, videos, and detailed notes would be crucial in the upcoming legal battle. One evening, as David reviewed the latest surveillance report, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Rebecca Hayes, his lawyer. She wanted to meet the next morning to discuss the next steps. David agreed, feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The legal battle was about to begin in earnest, and he needed to be prepared. The following morning, David arrived at Rebecca's office, a sleek, modern space that exuded professionalism. Rebecca greeted him with a warm smile, her demeanor confident and reassuring. "David, I've reviewed all the evidence you've gathered, and it is solid. We have a strong case for infidelity, which will work in your favor for custody and asset division." David nodded, feeling a sense of relief. "I want full custody of Ethan and Grace. They are my top priority." Rebecca leaned forward, her expression serious. "Full custody is a tough battle, but with the evidence of her affairs, we have a good chance. We'll also aim to get you the house and as much financial support as possible." David sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I just want to make sure my kids are okay." Rebecca's eyes softened. "We'll do our best, David. Stay strong and we'll get through this." As the days turned into weeks, David's life became a blur of legal meetings, court appearances, and strategic planning. Sarah's lawyer fought back fiercely, trying to paint David as controlling and overbearing. But the evidence of her infidelity was overwhelming, and each court appearance seemed to tilt the scales further in David's favor. In the midst of the chaos, David found solace in his routine. He continued his MBA classes, finding a sense of purpose and accomplishment in his studies. He spent quality time with Ethan and Grace, attending their school events, helping with homework, and simply being present. They were his anchor, keeping him grounded and focused on what truly mattered. One afternoon, as David was driving Ethan and Grace home from school, Ethan spoke up from the back seat. "Dad, what's going to happen to Mom?" David glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting his son's worried gaze. "I don't know, Ethan, but no matter what happens, we are going to be okay. We have each other, and that is what matters most." Grace, sitting next to Ethan, looked up at David with wide eyes. "Daddy, will we still live in our house?" David smiled reassuringly. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure we stay in our home. I want you both to feel safe and secure." As they pulled into the driveway, David's phone buzzed again. It was a notification from his bank, confirming the transfer of funds for another withdrawal. David had been making regular withdrawals from their savings, stashing the money in a secure location. He knew that the legal process could be long and costly, and he wanted to be prepared. That evening, after Ethan and Grace were in bed, David sat down at his desk and reviewed his plan. He had filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity, seeking full custody of the children and the house. He had also filed lawsuits against Brian Mitchell and the other men involved, knowing that even if he didn't win, the notoriety would damage their reputations and careers. David's mind wandered back to the conversation he had with Rebecca earlier that day. She had warned him that the legal battle would be tough, but he was ready. He had already lost so much, but he was determined to protect his children and rebuild his life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. David attended court hearings, met with his lawyer, and continued his MBA studies. He was determined to stay focused and strong, despite the emotional toll it was taking on him. One evening, as David was going through some old family photos, He came across a picture of him and Sarah on their wedding day. They looked so happy, so in love. It was hard to believe how much had changed. David felt a pang of sadness but quickly pushed it aside. He couldn't dwell on the past. He had to focus on the future. As he continued to sort through the photos, his phone rang. It was Rebecca. "David, we have a court date. It's in 2 weeks. Are you ready?" David took a deep breath. "Yes, I am ready." The days leading up to the court date were filled with anxiety and anticipation. David knew that this would be a pivotal moment in his life. He spent hours preparing, going over the evidence, and rehearsing what he would say in court. When the day finally arrived, David walked into the courtroom with a sense of determination. He glanced over at Sarah, who looked nervous and unsure. Their eyes met briefly, but David quickly looked away. He couldn't afford to let his emotions get in the way. The hearing was intense, with both sides presenting their cases. David's lawyer, Rebecca, was relentless, methodically presenting the evidence of Sarah's infidelity. Sarah's lawyer tried to deflect, painting David as controlling and overbearing, but the evidence was irrefutable. After hours of testimony and cross-examination, the judge called a recess. David stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool, crisp air. He felt a sense of relief. They were one step closer to a resolution. When the judge reconvened, he delivered his verdict. David was granted full custody of Ethan and Grace, the house, and a significant portion of their assets. Sarah was ordered to pay child support and given limited visitation rights. David felt a wave of emotion wash over him. It was finally over. He had won. But as he looked over at Sarah, he couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. They had once been so happy, so in love, but now their relationship was beyond repair. As David walked out of the courtroom, he felt a sense of hope for the future. He had protected his children, secured their home, and started rebuilding his life. The road ahead would be challenging, but with Ethan and Grace by his side, he knew they could face anything together. Chapter 4. The First Confrontation. David Miller sat in his home office, reviewing the latest financial reports from his MBA course. It had been a grueling few weeks, but the end was in sight. The legal battle was almost over, and he was confident that he would be granted full custody of Ethan and Grace. However, there was one final piece of the puzzle that needed to be addressed, confronting Sarah about the depth of her betrayal. That evening, after dinner, David asked Ethan and Grace to go to their rooms. He needed to have a serious conversation with their mother. They obeyed without question, sensing the tension in the air. Sarah was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone. David took a deep breath and walked in, determined to remain calm and collected. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady. Sarah looked up, her eyes wary. "What is it, David?" David sat down across from her, his gaze unwavering. "I want to know why. Why did you betray me and our family?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "David, I never meant for it to happen. I was unhappy, and Brian made me feel wanted." David's anger flared, but he kept his voice calm. "You think that justifies what you did? You tore our family apart for a fling with your boss?" "It wasn't just a fling," Sarah protested. "I thought I loved him." David shook his head, his heart aching. "And what about our children? Did you think about them at all?" Sarah looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm sorry, David, I really am. But I can change what happened." David leaned forward, his eyes cold. "No, you can but you need to understand the consequences of your actions. I have full custody of Ethan and Grace, and you'll have limited visitation rights. You need to make peace with that." Sarah's tears fell freely now. "I know I've hurt you, but please don't take the children away from me." David's resolve hardened. "You made your choice, Sarah. Now you have to live with it." The room fell silent, the weight of David's words hanging in the air. Sarah sobbed quietly, and David felt a pang of sorrow. Despite everything, she was still the mother of his children. But the betrayal was too deep, the trust too shattered. As the days passed, the legal proceedings came to a close. David was granted full custody of Ethan and Grace, the house, and a significant portion of their assets. Sarah was ordered to pay child support and given limited visitation rights. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. David threw himself into his MBA studies and his role as a father. He wanted to provide a stable, loving environment for his children, to show them that life could go on even after such a painful ordeal. He attended their school events, helped with homework, and spent quality time with them, creating new memories to replace the painful ones. One evening, as David was preparing dinner, Ethan walked into the kitchen. "Dad, can we talk?" David looked up, smiling. "Of course, Ethan. What's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated, then said, "Mom called today. She wants to see us." David's heart sank. He had known this day would come, but he wasn't sure he was ready. "What did she say?" "She said she misses us and wants to spend some time together," Ethan replied, his voice uncertain. David took a deep breath. "How do you feel about that?" Ethan shrugged. "I miss her too, but I don't want things to be awkward." David nodded, understanding his son's feelings. "It is okay to feel that way, Ethan. We'll figure this out together." Later that evening, David called Sarah. It was time to set some boundaries and discuss how they would handle the visitation. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice tentative. "David, we need to talk about the visitation schedule," David said, his tone firm but not unkind. Sarah sighed. "I know. I miss the kids, David. I want to be a part of their lives." David took a deep breath. "I understand that, but we need to do what's best for them. We'll start with supervised visits, and if things go well, we can discuss more time later." Sarah agreed, and they set a schedule for the visits. It was a difficult conversation, but it was necessary. David wanted to ensure that Ethan and Grace felt safe and secure, and that meant taking things slowly. The first visit was tense but manageable. David stayed nearby, ready to step in if needed. Sarah was emotional, but she did her best to engage with the children and make the most of their time together. Ethan and Grace were cautious but gradually warmed up to their mother. As the weeks went by, the visits became more frequent and less supervised. David watched closely, always ready to intervene if necessary. He knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but he was determined to do what was best for his children. One afternoon, as David was working on a project for his MBA course, his phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "Can we meet tomorrow? I have some news about the lawsuit against Brian Mitchell." David's pulse quickened. The lawsuit against Brian had been a long shot, but it was a crucial part of his plan. He agreed to meet Rebecca the next morning. When he arrived at Rebecca's office, she greeted him with a smile. "David, I have good news. We've reached a settlement with Brian Mitchell. He has agreed to pay a substantial sum in damages." David felt a surge of relief. "That is great news, Rebecca. Thank you for all your hard work." Rebecca nodded. "You've been through a lot, David. This settlement will help secure a future for you and your children." As David left Rebecca's office, he felt a sense of closure. The legal battles were coming to an end, and he could finally focus on rebuilding his life. He drove home, thinking about the future and what it would hold for him and his children. That evening, as David sat down to dinner with Ethan and Grace, he felt a sense of peace. They had been through a difficult journey, but they were stronger for it. They had each other, and that was what mattered most. "Dad, can we go to the park this weekend?" Grace asked, her eyes bright with excitement. David smiled. "Of course, Grace. We'll have a great time." As they finished dinner, David looked around the table at his children. They were his anchor, his reason for fighting and moving forward. He knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but with Ethan and Grace by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came their way. Chapter 5. Allies and Betrayals. David Miller stood by the window of his home office, staring out at the rain-soaked streets of San Francisco. The weight of the past few months had begun to lift, but he knew the journey was far from over. His legal battles were nearly behind him, but the emotional scars remained. As he turned back to his desk, his phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected source, Mike Thompson, a former colleague from Tech Innovations, Inc. Hey David, long time no talk. Heard about what happened. If you need anything, let me know. Let's catch up soon. David felt a mix of surprise and relief. Mike had been a good friend during his time at the company, but they had lost touch after David's dismissal. The message offered a glimmer of hope and the possibility of rekindling an old friendship. The next evening, David met Mike at a local coffee shop. The familiar hum of conversations and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee provided a comforting backdrop. Mike greeted David with a warm handshake and a genuine smile. "David, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" Mike asked, concern evident in his eyes. David shrugged, managing a small smile. "It's been rough, but I'm getting through it. How about you? How's life treating you?" Mike nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Can't complain. Still at Tech Innovations, but I have been thinking about moving on. The company is stagnating, and there's not much room for growth." David leaned in, intrigued. "What are you planning to do next?" Mike smiled. "I've been working on a startup idea. It is still in the early stages, but I think it has potential. I'd love to get your input. Maybe even have you on board if you are interested." David felt a surge of excitement. The idea of a new venture, something to focus on and channel his energy into, was exactly what he needed. "I'd love to hear more about it, Mike. Let us set up a time to go over the details." As they discussed the startup, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. The conversation was invigorating, and for the first time in months, he felt hopeful about the future. They agreed to meet again soon to delve deeper into the plans. A few days later, David received a call from Rebecca. "David, there's something you need to know. Sarah's lawyer has filed a motion to challenge the custody arrangement. They're claiming that you are using the children to punish Sarah and that your home environment is unstable." David's heart sank. He had worked so hard to create a stable and loving environment for Ethan and Grace. "What do we do, Rebecca?" Rebecca's voice was steady and reassuring. "We fight it. We'll gather evidence to show that you are providing a safe and supportive home. Do you have anyone who can vouch for you?" David thought for a moment. "Mike Thompson, a friend and former colleague. He has known me for years and can attest to my character and my relationship with the kids." "Good. We'll need his testimony. I'll prepare the necessary documents. Stay strong, David. We won to let them win," Rebecca said firmly. The following week was a whirlwind of preparations. David met with Mike to discuss the situation, and Mike readily agreed to help. "You've always been a great dad, David. I'll do whatever I can to support you." As the court date approached, David couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Sarah's attempts to undermine him, even after everything she had done, felt like a new low. But he was determined to stay focused and protect his children. On the day of the hearing, David walked into the courtroom with Rebecca by his side. Sarah was there, looking more composed than he had seen her in months. Her lawyer presented their case, painting David as vengeful and manipulative. But when it was David's turn, Rebecca presented a compelling argument, backed by evidence and Mike's testimony. Mike spoke confidently, recounting his long-standing friendship with David and emphasizing his dedication to his children. "David is one of the most caring and responsible people I know. His children are his world, and he has done everything possible to provide them with a stable and loving home." When the judge finally delivered the verdict, it was in David's favor. The custody arrangement would remain unchanged. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had won another battle, but the war was far from over. That evening, David sat down with Ethan and Grace to explain what had happened. "We won today, but it might not be the end. Your mom is going through a tough time, and she's trying to find her place. But no matter what happens, I promise we'll get through it together." Ethan looked up at David, his eyes filled with determination. "We know, Dad. We trust you." Grace nodded, her expression serious. "We are a team." David smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Yes, we are." In the following weeks, David threw himself into the startup project with Mike. It was a welcome distraction and a chance to rebuild his career. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and David found himself once again passionate about his profession. One afternoon, as David was working on a presentation for potential investors, he received an unexpected visitor. It was Sarah, standing at the door, looking hesitant and vulnerable. "David, "Can we talk?" she asked softly. David hesitated, then nodded. "Come in." They sat down in the living room, the tension between them palpable. Sarah took a deep breath. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I need your help. I've lost my job, and I can find another one. My reputation is ruined, and I don't know what to do." David felt a mix of emotions, anger, pity, and a lingering sense of betrayal. "What do you expect me to do, Sarah? You brought this on yourself." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "I know, and I regret everything. But I need to find a way to support myself, and I don't have anyone else to turn to." David sighed, the weight of her words settling over him. "I'll help you, but only because I don't want Ethan and Grace to see their mother fall apart. I'll reach out to some contacts and see if I can find you a job." Sarah nodded, her gratitude evident. "Thank you, David. I appreciate it." As Sarah left, David felt a sense of closure. It was time to move forward, not just for himself, but for his children. He had rebuilt his life from the ashes, and now it was time to help Sarah do the same, if only for the sake of their children. The startup project with Mike began to take off, attracting interest from investors and potential clients. David felt a renewed sense of purpose and direction, his days filled with meetings, planning, and development. He was finally finding his footing again. One evening, as David and Mike were finalizing a pitch for a major investor, Mike turned to him with a serious expression. "David, there's something I need to tell you. I've been approached by a competitor who wants to buy us out. They are offering a substantial sum, but I wanted to discuss it with you first." David considered the offer carefully. The money would provide financial security for him and his children, but he was passionate about the project and the potential it held. "What do you think, Mike?" Mike shrugged. "It's a tempting offer, but I believe in what we are building. I'd rather continue and see where it takes us." David nodded, his decision made. "I agree. Let's keep going. We've worked hard to get this far, and I think we have something special." As they continued to work on the pitch, David felt a sense of camaraderie with Mike. They were more than business partners, they were friends, united by a common goal and a shared vision. The pitch was a success, securing a significant investment that allowed the startup to expand and hire new talent. David felt a renewed sense of hope and excitement for the future. He had faced the darkest moments of his life and emerged stronger, ready to build a new life for himself and his children. One afternoon, as David was picking up Ethan and Grace from school, Grace looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, do you think things will ever be normal again?" David smiled, ruffling her hair. "Things might never be exactly the same, Grace, but we'll find our new normal. As long as we have each other, we'll be okay." Ethan nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we're a team. We can handle anything." As they drove home, David felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but with Ethan and Grace by his side, he knew they could face anything together. They were a team, and together, they were unstoppable. Chapter 6. Twists and Turns. David Miller felt a sense of accomplishment as he stood before a room full of potential investors, presenting the latest advancements of his startup. The project with Mike had gained significant traction, and the momentum was exhilarating. As the presentation concluded, David exchanged confident glances with Mike, who nodded in approval. After the meeting, David's phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "David, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet tomorrow?" David's curiosity was piqued. Rebecca's messages usually meant significant developments. He agreed to meet her the next morning at her office. The next day, David sat across from Rebecca, who looked unusually serious. "David, we've received some new information about Sarah. It seems she has a past that neither of us were aware of." David frowned. "What do you mean?" Rebecca handed him a folder. "Sarah was involved in some questionable activities before you met. It's possible that this information could be used to challenge her credibility even further." David opened the folder, scanning the documents. His heart sank as he read about Sarah's involvement in a financial scandal during her college years. She had managed to keep it hidden, but now it was resurfacing. "What does this mean for us?" David asked, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. Rebecca sighed. It could strengthen our case if Sarah decides to challenge the custody arrangement again. But it also means we need to be prepared for any backlash. This kind of information can be volatile. David nodded, absorbing the news. I understand. Let's be ready for anything. That evening, as David sat with Ethan and Grace, he couldn't help but think about Sarah's hidden past. It added another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. He decided to keep the information from the children for now, focusing instead on maintaining their stability. As the weeks went by, the startup continued to grow. David and Mike secured additional funding and began expanding their team. The work was demanding, but it was a welcome distraction from the personal challenges David was facing. One afternoon, while David was working on a new project proposal, his phone rang. It was Sarah. He hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. "David, I need to talk to you," Sarah said, her voice strained. "Can we meet?" David agreed, arranging to meet her at a nearby park. When he arrived, Sarah was already there, looking anxious. "David, I know about the information you found," she began, her eyes filled with worry. "I don't want it to affect the kids. Please, don't use it against me." David took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah, I have no intention of hurting Ethan and Grace, but you need to understand that your actions have consequences. I am willing to work with you, but you have to be honest and transparent from now on." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "I will be. I just want to move forward and do what is best for our children." David felt a pang of sympathy. Despite everything, he knew that Sarah cared about their children. "We'll figure this out together, but you have to be honest." In the following weeks, David and Sarah worked on rebuilding trust, not as a couple, but as co-parents. It was a difficult process, but they both knew it was necessary for Ethan and Grace's well-being. Meanwhile, the startup faced its own set of challenges. Competitors were emerging, and the pressure to innovate was intense. One day, Mike approached David with a concerned expression. "David, we have a problem. One of our key developers, Amanda, has been approached by a competitor. They are offering her a lucrative deal to jump ship." David felt a surge of frustration. Amanda was a crucial part of their team, and losing her could set them back significantly. "What can we do to keep her?" Mike shrugged. "We need to make a counteroffer, but it's going to be tough. We don't have the same resources as the competitor." David thought for a moment, then made a decision. "Let's talk to Amanda. We need to show her that we value her and that she is an essential part of our vision." They arranged a meeting with Amanda, explaining their plans for the future and how vital she was to their success. David emphasized the sense of community and purpose they had built within the startup. Amanda listened carefully, weighing her options. After a long pause, she smiled. "I believe in what we are building here. I'll stay." David and Mike breathed a sigh of relief. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. As the startup continued to grow, David found himself balancing the demands of work and family. He made sure to attend Ethan's soccer games and Grace's dance recitals, cherishing the moments of normalcy amidst the chaos. One evening, as David was tucking Grace into bed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, do you think Mommy will ever come back home?" David felt a lump in his throat. "I don't know, Grace, but no matter what happens, your mom and I both love you very much. We'll always be here for you." Grace nodded, hugging her stuffed animal tightly. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart," David said, kissing her forehead. The next day, David received an unexpected email from Brian Mitchell's lawyer. They wanted to settle the lawsuit out of court, offering a substantial sum in exchange for dropping the case. David met with Rebecca to discuss the offer. "What do you think, Rebecca?" Rebecca considered the proposal. "It is a significant amount, and it would save us the time and stress of a prolonged court battle. But the decision is ultimately yours." David thought about it carefully. The money would provide financial security, allowing him to focus on his children and the startup. "Let us take the offer. It's time to put this behind us." With the settlement secured, David felt a sense of relief. The legal battles were finally coming to an end, and he could focus on the future. The startup was thriving, and he was building a new life for himself and his children. One evening, as David and Mike were discussing the next steps for the startup, Mike turned to David with a serious expression. David, I have been thinking. We've come a long way, but I want to make sure we were on the same page about the future. What do you see for us in the next 5 years? David considered the question, feeling a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. I see us growing, expanding our reach, and making a real impact in the industry. But more importantly, I see us maintaining the culture and values that brought us together in the first place. Mike smiled, nodding in agreement. I couldn't have said it better myself. Here's to the future. As they clinked their coffee cups together, David felt a sense of hope and excitement. The twists and turns of the past few months had tested him in ways he never imagined, but he had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. With his children by his side and a promising future ahead, David knew they could face anything together. Chapter 7. The High-Stakes Climax. David Miller stood at the front of the conference room, his palms slightly sweaty, as he prepared to deliver a crucial presentation to a group of high-profile investors. The room was filled with influential figures from the tech industry, each one a potential key to the future of his startup. Mike Thompson, his trusted partner, gave him an encouraging nod from the back of the room. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, David began, his voice steady. Our company, InnovateTech, has made significant strides in developing cutting-edge software solutions that will revolutionize the industry. The presentation flowed smoothly, with David outlining their innovative products, market potential, and strategic plans for growth. He showcased their recent successes and future projections, painting a compelling picture of a company on the brink of major success. As he concluded, David opened the floor for questions. The investors fired off inquiries about their technology, market strategies, and financial projections. David and Mike handled each question with confidence, their responses well-rehearsed and convincing. After the presentation, David mingled with the investors, answering more questions and building relationships. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and he could sense that several investors were seriously interested. Later that evening, as David and Mike celebrated their successful pitch over dinner, David's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Rebecca. He excused himself and stepped outside to take the call. David, we have a situation, Rebecca said, her tone urgent. Sarah's lawyer has filed an emergency motion for a custody hearing. They claim there is new evidence that you are unfit as a parent. David's heart pounded. What new evidence? This is ridiculous. Rebecca sighed. It's a smear campaign, but we need to take it seriously. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. David's mind raced. The timing couldn't have been worse. He had just made significant progress with the investors, and now he had to deal with another legal battle. I'll be there. Thanks, Rebecca. David returned to the table, his expression grim. Mike, I need to deal with something urgent. Can you handle things here? Mike looked concerned but nodded. Of course, David. Go take care of what you need to. We've got this. The next morning, David arrived at the courthouse, his anxiety mounting. Rebecca was waiting for him, her expression determined. We'll fight this, David. Just stay calm and focused. As they entered the courtroom, David spotted Sarah and her lawyer. The atmosphere was tense, and David felt a knot in his stomach. The judge called the hearing to order, and Sarah's lawyer began presenting their case. The allegations were baseless, but they painted a picture of David as a vengeful ex-husband, using his children as pawns. They even produced doctored photos and fabricated witness statements to support their claims. Rebecca countered with evidence of David's dedication as a father, highlighting his stable home environment and the positive impact he had on Ethan and Grace's lives. She presented testimony from friends, teachers, and even Ethan's soccer coach, all of whom vouched for David's character and parenting. David felt a surge of pride as Ethan took the stand, his voice steady and confident. My dad has always been there for us. He loves us and takes care of us. We feel safe with him. Grace, too young to testify formally, had drawn a picture of their family, showing herself, Ethan, and David together, happy and smiling. Rebecca submitted it as evidence, and it brought a moment of warmth to the otherwise cold proceedings. The judge listened intently, his expression thoughtful. After several hours of intense arguments, he finally delivered his verdict. Ivy reviewed the evidence and testimonies. It is clear that Mr. Miller provides a loving and stable environment for his children. The custody arrangement will remain unchanged. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had won again, but the victory felt bittersweet. As he left the courtroom, Sarah approached him, her expression conflicted. "David, I am sorry for all of this," she said quietly. "I just want to be a part of their lives." David looked at her, his emotions mixed. "Sarah, you need to stop fighting me and start working with me, for the kids' sake." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I will. I promise." As David drove home, he reflected on the tumultuous journey he had been on. Despite the challenges, he had managed to protect his children and secure their future. The road ahead would still have its difficulties, but he felt more confident than ever in his ability to navigate it. That evening, as David sat with Ethan and Grace, he felt a renewed sense of hope. They played a board game together, laughter filling the room. It was a simple moment, but it symbolized everything he had fought for. A few days later, David and Mike received the news they had been waiting for. Several investors had decided to back their startup, providing the funding they needed to take their company to the next level. It was a monumental achievement, and David felt a deep sense of satisfaction. As they celebrated with their team, Mike pulled David aside. "We did it, David. We were really going to make this happen." David smiled, clinking his glass with Mike S. "Yes, we are, and it's just the beginning." The High-Stakes Climax had been a test of David's resilience, determination, and love for his children. He had faced betrayal, legal battles, and intense pressure, but he had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. With the support of his friends, the love of his children, and a promising future ahead, David felt ready to take on whatever challenges came his way. Together, they were unstoppable. Chapter 8. The Fallout. The sun was setting as David Miller drove home from the office, the golden light casting long shadows across the San Francisco streets. The recent victories in both his personal and professional life had given him a sense of accomplishment, but he knew the journey was far from over. The fallout from the custody battle and the challenges of scaling his startup demanded constant vigilance. When he walked through the door, the smell of dinner greeted him. Ethan and Grace were setting the table, their faces lighting up as they saw him. "Hey, Dad!" Ethan called out, waving a fork. David smiled, setting his briefcase down. "Hey, kids! How was your day?" "It was great! I got an A on my math test," Grace announced proudly, holding up her paper. "That S fantastic, Grace," David said, giving her a high five. He turned to Ethan. "And you, Ethan? How was school?" "Pretty good. We have a soccer match this weekend." "Coach says I've been doing really well," Ethan replied, his eyes bright with excitement. David felt a swell of pride. Despite everything, his children were thriving. They sat down to dinner, the conversation flowing easily. It was moments like these that made all the struggles worthwhile. After dinner, David helped Grace with her homework while Ethan practiced his soccer drills in the backyard. As he worked through math problems with Grace, David's phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. It was a simple message, but it carried weight. "Thank you for giving me a chance to see the kids. I appreciate it." David replied, "It's what's best for them. Let us keep working together." The next day, David was back at the office, deep in the throes of a new project. The startup was expanding rapidly, and the pressure to deliver was intense. He and Mike had secured significant funding, but now they needed to prove they could meet their ambitious goals. As David reviewed the latest development reports, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from Rebecca. "David, I have some news. It seems Brian Mitchell is trying to make a comeback. He's joining a rival company and could pose a threat to us." David's grip tightened on the phone. Brian Mitchell had been a thorn in his side for too long. "What can we do to counteract this?" Rebecca's voice was calm and measured. "We need to stay ahead of the game, focus on our strengths, and continue to innovate. I'll keep an eye on his activities and let you know if anything significant comes up." David thanked her and ended the call, his mind racing. He needed to stay focused and not let Brian's reappearance derail their progress. Later that week, David attended Ethan's soccer match. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the sounds of cheering parents and the thud of the ball being kicked around. Ethan played with determination and skill, his team securing a hard-fought victory. As the final whistle blew, Ethan ran over to David, beaming with pride. "Did you see that, Dad?" "We won!" Ethan exclaimed, his face flushed with excitement. David hugged him tightly. "I saw. You were amazing out there, Ethan. I am so proud of you." As they walked back to the car, David's phone buzzed with another message from Sarah. She had been consistently checking in, trying to rebuild trust and maintain her relationship with the children. David appreciated her efforts, even though the wounds of the past still lingered. That evening, after the kids were in bed, David sat on the porch, the cool night air a welcome respite. His thoughts drifted to the future. He knew the fallout from the custody battle, and his divorce would continue to reverberate, but he felt more equipped to handle it now. His relationship with Sarah was still strained, but they were making progress for the sake of their children. The startup was thriving, but the pressure to stay ahead in a competitive market was immense. David knew that maintaining their momentum would require relentless focus and innovation. He felt a surge of determination. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let anything or anyone derail his progress. As the weeks passed, David and his team at InnovateTech worked tirelessly to launch their new product. The stakes were high, but the potential rewards were even higher. Late nights and early mornings became the norm, but David thrived on the challenge. He was driven by a desire to succeed, not just for himself, but for his children and his team. One evening, as David was preparing a presentation for an upcoming investor meeting, his phone buzzed with a call from Mike. "David, we have a problem. There's been a security breach. Some of our sensitive data has been leaked." David felt his heart skip a beat. "What? How did this happen? We're still investigating, but it looks like someone on the inside might be involved. We need to act fast to contain the damage," Mike explained, his voice tense. David sprang into action, calling an emergency meeting with the IT team and key executives. They worked through the night, identifying the breach and implementing measures to secure their systems. The situation was dire, but they managed to contain the leak and mitigate the damage. The next morning, exhausted but determined, David addressed his team. "We faced a serious challenge, but we handled it together. We'll learn from this and come back stronger. Let us focus on what we do best and keep pushing forward." The team's resilience and dedication were palpable. They rallied together, determined to overcome the setback and deliver on their promises. As David drove home that evening, he reflected on the challenges he had faced and the strength he had found within himself and his team. The road ahead would still have its obstacles, but he felt more equipped than ever to navigate them. When he arrived home, Ethan and Grace greeted him with hugs and stories about their day. They were his anchor, the reason he fought so hard and never gave up. As they sat down to dinner, David felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The fallout from the past year had been intense, but David had emerged stronger, more determined, and more focused on what truly mattered. With his children by his side, a thriving startup, and a supportive team, he felt ready to face whatever challenges the future held. That evening, as David tucked Ethan and Grace into bed, he reflected on the journey they had been on. "Remember, no matter what happens, we face it together. We are a team." Ethan and Grace nodded, their eyes filled with trust and love. "We know, Dad. We can handle anything." David smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The fallout had tested him in ways he never imagined, but it had also brought him closer to his children and his true purpose. Together, they were unstoppable. Chapter 9. Redemption and Renewal. The sun was shining brightly as David Miller stood on the balcony of his office, overlooking the bustling streets of San Francisco. The past few months had been a whirlwind of activity and progress, and David felt a renewed sense of purpose and direction. The startup was thriving, and his relationship with Ethan and Grace had never been stronger. David turned back to his desk, where a stack of papers awaited his attention. The launch of their latest product was just around the corner, and the pressure to deliver was immense. But David thrived on the challenge, driven by a desire to create something meaningful and impactful. As he worked through the day, David received a call from Mike. "Hey, David, I've got some great news. We've just secured a partnership with one of the biggest tech firms in the industry. This is going to take us to the next level." David felt a surge of excitement. "That's amazing, Mike. Let us celebrate tonight." That evening, David and Mike gathered with their team to celebrate the milestone. The atmosphere was electric, filled with a sense of accomplishment and anticipation for what the future held. As they toasted to their success, David felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had been on and the people who had supported them along the way. The next day, David received an unexpected visit from Sarah. She stood at the door, looking more composed than he had seen her in months. "David, can we talk?" David nodded, inviting her in. They sat down in the living room, the tension between them still present but lessened by time and mutual understanding. "I wanted to thank you for helping me find a job," Sarah began, her voice sincere. "I've been working hard to get my life back on track, and I appreciate everything you've done for me and the kids." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. It's important for Ethan and Grace to see us working together." Sarah looked down, her eyes filled with regret. "I know I made mistakes, and I'm sorry for everything. I just want to be a better mother to our children." David took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "We all make mistakes, Sarah. What's important is that we learn from them and move forward. Let us focus on being the best parents we can be for Ethan and Grace." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, David. I want to let you down." As Sarah left, David felt a sense of closure. They had both come a long way, and while their relationship would never be the same, they had found a way to coexist and co-parent effectively. The weeks that followed were filled with preparations for the product launch. David and his team worked tirelessly, fine-tuning every detail to ensure a successful debut. The pressure was intense, but the sense of camaraderie and shared purpose kept them motivated. On the day of the launch, the atmosphere in the office was charged with excitement. David stood before his team, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. "Today is the culmination of months of hard work and dedication. I am proud of each and every one of you. Let us make this a success." The launch event was a resounding success, attracting attention from industry leaders and media alike. The product received rave reviews and the orders began pouring in. David felt a surge of pride and relief. They had done it. That evening, as David returned home, he was greeted by Ethan and Grace, their faces alight with excitement. "Dad, we saw the launch online!" "You were amazing!" Ethan exclaimed. David hugged his children tightly. "Thank you, guys. I couldn't have done it without you." As they sat down to dinner, David felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and challenging, but they had emerged stronger and closer as a family. He looked around the table, grateful for the love and support that had carried him through the toughest times. Later that night, as David tucked Ethan and Grace into bed, Grace looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, are you happy?" David smiled, his heart full. "Yes, Grace, I am very happy, and I am so proud of you and Ethan. You both mean the world to me." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "We love you, Dad. We are proud of you too." David kissed their foreheads, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. "Good night, my loves. Sleep well." As he left their room, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced his demons, fought for his family, and built something meaningful. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but he felt more equipped than ever to navigate them. The next day, David met with Mike to discuss the future of InnovateTech. They sat in a conference room, the morning light streaming through the windows. "We've come a long way, Mike. What's next for us?" Mike leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I think it's time to start thinking about global expansion. We've proven ourselves here, and there is a huge market out there." David nodded, feeling a surge of excitement. "I agree. Let us start planning our next steps." As they outlined their strategy, David felt a sense of anticipation for the future. The challenges they had faced had only made them stronger, and he was confident that they could handle whatever came next. In the months that followed, InnovateTech continued to grow, expanding into new markets and securing additional partnerships. The team's hard work and dedication paid off, and the company became a major player in the tech industry. David balanced the demands of his career with his responsibilities as a father. He made sure to attend Ethan's soccer matches and Grace's dance recitals, cherishing the moments they spent together. The bond between them grew stronger, and David felt a deep sense of pride in the family they had become. One evening, as David and Mike were working late at the office, Mike turned to him with a serious expression. "David, I've been thinking about our journey. We've faced so many challenges, but we have always come out on top. I couldn't have asked for a better partner." David smiled, clinking his coffee cup with Mike's. "It's been an incredible journey, Mike, and it is only just beginning." As they continued to work, David felt a sense of fulfillment and gratitude. The path to redemption and renewal had been difficult, but it had also been deeply rewarding. He had found his purpose, built a successful company, and strengthened his relationship with his children. The road ahead would still have its twists and turns, but David felt ready to face whatever challenges came his way. With the support of his team, the love of his children, and a renewed sense of purpose, he knew they could achieve anything together. Chapter 10. Epilogue. Moving forward. 3 years had passed since the whirlwind of events that had changed David Miller's life forever. The bustling streets of San Francisco had become a familiar backdrop to his daily routine, but the man who navigated them now was a far cry from the one who had faced betrayal and heartache. David stood on the stage of a grand conference hall, the InnovateTech logo gleaming on the large screen behind him. The company's annual summit was in full swing, and he was about to deliver the keynote address. The room was filled with industry leaders, investors, and the InnovateTech team, all eager to hear about the future of the company that had become a major player in the tech world. "Good morning, everyone," David began, his voice confident and clear. "It is an honor to stand before you today and reflect on the incredible journey we've had at InnovateTech. Our success is a testament to the hard work, dedication, and innovation of every single member of our team." As David spoke about their achievements and future plans, he felt a profound sense of pride. The company had expanded globally, their products were industry leaders, and their impact was undeniable. But what filled David with the most pride was the culture they had built, a culture of resilience, collaboration, and integrity. After the summit, David made his way home, where Ethan and Grace were waiting for him. Ethan, now a high school sophomore, had grown into a confident and thoughtful young man. Grace, in middle school, was blossoming into a bright and creative teenager. "Hey, Dad, how was the summit?" Ethan asked, looking up from his laptop. "It was great, Ethan. The team did an amazing job," David replied, ruffling his son's hair. Grace ran over, holding up a drawing. "Look, Daddy, I made this for you." David took the drawing, his heart swelling with love. It was a picture of their family, complete with their dog, Max. "This is beautiful, Grace. Thank you." They spent the evening together, sharing stories and laughter. As David tucked them into bed, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life they had built. The next morning, David met Mike at a local cafe. The two friends had become closer than ever, their partnership solidified by the trials they had faced together. "David, I've been thinking," Mike said, sipping his coffee. "We've achieved so much with InnovateTech. What's next for us?" David smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I've been thinking about that too. I believe it is time for us to give back. Let's start a foundation to support young entrepreneurs and innovators. We've been given so much, and it's time to pay it forward." Mike's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "I love that idea. Let us do it." The InnovateTech Foundation was born, dedicated to providing mentorship, funding, and resources to young entrepreneurs. It quickly became a beacon of hope and opportunity for aspiring innovators, and David felt a deep sense of fulfillment in helping others achieve their dreams. As the foundation grew, so did David's personal life. He had met someone special, Emma, a kind-hearted and intelligent woman who shared his values and passions. They had been dating for over a year, and David felt ready to take the next step. One evening, as the sun set over the Golden Gate Bridge, David and Emma walked along the beach. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, and the moment felt perfect. "Emma, there's something I want to ask you," David said, his heart pounding with anticipation. Emma turned to him, her eyes filled with warmth and love. "What is it, David?" David took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket to pull out a small velvet box. "Emma, you have brought so much joy and love into my life. Will you marry me?" Emma's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, a radiant smile spreading across her face. "Yes, David, I will." They embraced, the world around them fading into the background. In that moment, David felt an overwhelming sense of happiness and hope for the future. Their wedding was a beautiful celebration of love and new beginnings. Ethan and Grace stood by their father's side, beaming with pride and happiness. The ceremony was intimate, filled with friends and family who had supported David throughout his journey. As David and Emma exchanged vows, David felt a deep sense of peace. The trials and tribulations of the past had shaped him into the man he was today, and he was grateful for every experience that had brought him to this moment. In the months that followed, David continued to balance his roles as a father, entrepreneur, and now a husband. InnovateTech flourished, the foundation made a significant impact, and his family thrived. One evening, as David sat on the porch with Ethan and Grace, they looked out at the star-filled sky. "Dad, do you ever think about how far we've come?" Ethan asked, his voice thoughtful. David nodded, smiling. "All the time, Ethan. We've been through a lot, but we've come out stronger on the other side, and I am so proud of both of you." Grace leaned her head on David's shoulder. "We are proud of you too, Dad. You are our hero." David felt a lump in his throat, his heart filled with love. "Thank you, Grace. That means the world to me." As they sat together, David reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The challenges, the victories, the growth it had all led to this moment of peace and fulfillment. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he felt ready to face them, with his family by his side. In the end, it wasn't just about overcoming obstacles or achieving success. It was about the love, resilience, and connections that sustained them. And with that, David knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as a family.